The iPhone XR debuted alongside the XS and the XS Max almost 3 years ago now, and it went on to become one of the most popular phones in the world with over 46 million phones shipped in 2019 alone. And it's easy to see why. The XR was the most affordable new phone that Apple had released that year, and despite some small cutbacks compared to the XS, the XR was still an excellent phone. But that was back in 2018, so today I'm going to take you through all of the reasons you should consider buying this phone here in 2021, as well as a few reasons that might make you want to turn and run the other way. It's time for Tech Rewind. Tech journalist Raymond Wong from Mashable called the iPhone XR the iPhone for everyone, and while the word everyone might be a bit of an exaggeration, I can get behind this sentiment. For most people, the iPhone XR is absolutely everything they need in a phone, and to be completely honest, that holds true for the most part here in 2021 as well. Although this phone is nearly 3 years old, it still looks like a brand new phone from the rear. This is one of the cleanest iPhones Apple has made in the past decade in my personal opinion, partly because of the singular camera on the back that doesn't hog all of the attention, and partly because of the plethora of stunning colors that the XR comes in. Now, okay, little bit of self-reflection here. When the XR was first released, a lot of us tech nerds were pretty critical about this part of the phone. The bezels are a little thicker than the ones on the XS phones, and the display is a little lower on the resolution side of things, but looking back, our nitpicking was really only valid in the eyes of other tech nerds. For everybody else, this display is perfectly a-okay. The colors are nice and vibrant with no real color balance issues, and unless you're really pixel peeping, you'll be perfectly fine with the amount of sharpness that this screen provides. It's got a pair of stereo speakers too, in case you don't have a pair of Bluetooth earbuds lying around. At 6.1 inches, it's a nice Goldilocks sized phone. It's not huge like the S21 Ultra or tiny like the iPhone 12 mini. Since the display is running the old faithful LCD panel, you're also not going to encounter any issues with screen burn-in like the OLED panels in some other phones that are this old or older. That does mean that the contrast isn't going to be quite as good as displays with OLED, but personally I don't think it makes that big of a difference. Now, if you're worried about the build quality from a more affordable phone from Apple, don't be. The XR is still every bit as well made as their flagship phones with glass backs and aluminum side rails. While I would still put a case on this phone to make sure it's protected, it feels strong enough to take on a few drops every now and again, and it's IP67 rated for both water and dust resistance too. Aside from the cost, another thing that made this phone so popular is what's on the inside. The XR shares the same excellent A12 BIONIC CPU as the much more expensive XS and XS Max. It actually has a bigger battery than the XS too, and we'll talk about battery life in just a sec. The only real downside to the XR performance-wise is that it has a gigabyte less of RAM than the XS at 3 gigs instead of 4, so the phone will occasionally try and force close out of apps that haven't been used in a while. Other than that though, the XR feels every bit as fast as my iPhone 12 series phones. Honestly, that's one thing that Apple sometimes doesn't get enough credit for. These older phones continue to get software updates that optimize them so well that it makes it difficult to tell which phone is which in the performance department. I would have absolutely no issue with using this phone in 2021, and I'm someone who's used to using much newer and much more expensive phones. It's definitely still fast enough for everyday use. Battery life, on the other hand, might be a bit of a different story. When this phone was first launched, it was praised very highly for its excellent battery life. I mean, it had a bigger battery than their flagship XS, along with a lower resolution display, so better battery life was all but guaranteed. The problem here is that it has a capacity of around 2,900 milliamp hours, which is still relatively small, and when you have a small battery on an aging phone, battery life tends to suffer. My battery health is sitting at around 90% on the XR, and even though this phone can get me through the average day, people that tend to use their phones heavily for 4 to 5 hours a day might have some difficulty. Take a look at this day, for example. I had just over 3 hours of screen on time on the XR, which is fairly average for me, but I had only a third of my battery life remaining. If I had been playing some games on my phone at all that day or taking a lot of photos, the XR would have probably died a lot sooner than I would have liked. On the plus side, the XR does have 15-watt fast charging via that lightning port, as well as wireless charging if you'd rather not have to plug in your phone. All right, my favorite part of the review, let's talk about these cameras. On the XR, there's a single 12 megapixel camera on the rear and a 7 megapixel camera on the front. That 12 megapixel wide angle is the same one that's on the more expensive XS and XS Max. Photos coming from that camera were consistently decent with good sharpness and color that was bang on in most situations. You're not gonna get modern flagship quality photos here, but I'm fairly confident in saying that most people will be perfectly happy with the snaps that you can get on this phone. Like a lot of the phones I test for Tech Rewind, these older phones phones have matured with software updates over time that tend to make the camera significantly better than it was when the phone first released. The portrait mode is pretty good too, although you can't take portrait shots of objects at all. There has to be a face in the frame to do any sort of background blurring. One thing I was a little surprised by is the front-facing camera. I thought it was going to be pretty bad given the fact that it only has a 7-megapixel sensor, but more often than not, I was actually impressed with it. Photos coming from it were way sharper than I was expecting. Alright, now let's talk about the cost. The thing about iPhones is that they tend to hold their value a little bit better than most Android phones, which is both a good thing and a bit of a bad thing. They're a little bit more expensive to buy used, but if you do buy one and then decide to sell it a little bit later, you won't lose much money at all. I got my Coral 10R for around 400 USD, and it's in near perfect condition. You can find phones that are cheaper than that if you don't mind putting up with a few scratches or dings, but between $350 and $450 is the going rate for the 10Rs right now on the used markets. If that seems a little too expensive, keep this in mind. The iPhone 10R is going to continue to get updates from Apple for many, many more years. I mean, look, the iPhone 6S that was released back in 2015, 6 years ago, just got the latest iOS 14. In all likelihood, the 10R is going to get at least 3 more years of updates. $400 is not a lot of money to spend on a phone that'll last at least that long, in my opinion. So at the end of every Tech Rewind video, I give each phone a rating from A+ all the way at the top to F all the way at the bottom, and the iPhone 10R with its excellent performance, solid build quality, good cameras, and the promise of many, many more software updates into the future gets an A- rating from me. Do not underestimate this phone. It's an excellent pick here in 2021. If you like this kind of video, but you're more of an Android person, I highly recommend you check out this episode of Tech Rewind right here about the Samsung Galaxy S9. It's a lot cheaper than the 10R too. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day.